Well, we're here anyway. Sorry, took a little time to get the technical stuff worked out. I'll get it mostly at some point here. Anyway, uh, nice to have you all with me today. It's nice that you could be here. Um, I want to address 4 questions that people sent in, and then we'll see what time is left on the other side of that. Sally Herr sent in 2 questions. My question for your next gathering are about the environment. When will nations and groups come together to address the environmental issues? And then the second question, when will free energy machines no longer be suppressed? From both of those were from Sally Herr. Now, I did get a question from Mary Weiss. Could you say more about Jupiter retrograde? Is this an opportunity for us to get past some of the issues that divide us, or more of the same? And then the fourth question comes from Judy Feitig. My question for the meeting is, what do astrological indicators suggest in regard to inflation in our country? Will it become worse or abate? Okay, so we'll go back to the top. These are all good questions, worthy of some time. Let me start with Sally's question first. What about the environment? Are groups going to get together and work together for, common cause for the planet? Now, it would seem it would make sense. So we're all going to die if we don't save the planet. My daughter Katie was leaving a building a couple of days ago, and somebody that she was talking to said, oh, they don't believe in climate change, that it was just a bunch of made up stuff. I didn't really believe, until she said it, I had a hard time believing anybody thought like that anymore. But as you'll see as we go through some of this stuff today, people believe all kinds of stuff that's just nuts. Well, first of all, we already have started to work together. There were the, Paris Climate Accords, and there's been a number of other things where people have gotten together and nations have worked out some protocols, and there is an initiative in the European Union right now to completely eliminate all carbon fuels by 2035. And they're taking some pretty dramatic steps to do that. We'll see. We'll see, how this comes about. Now, when we talk about all the nations getting together and working for a common cause, you realize that all these things take time. At the time of the American Revolution, what did it take to get all of these 13 colonies to work together for a common cause? Well, it took a common enemy. Without the British, the United States would not have come about. So the common enemy here isn't pollution. The enemy is ignorance. We don't do what's in our best interest, individually or collectively. Now, I've spent a lot of time studying this, and I have some thoughts on it. I won't say answers. I don't know that I'm right, but I'm pretty deep in the weeds on this now. I don't think that we're going to have one functioning world government until we have democracy everywhere. Uh,
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
it's it doesn't make sense. How do you have a collection of dictators working together, even if you took the United States out of the equation? And how do you uh, have functioning governments that are willing to relinquish some of their autonomy if you've got political leaders in power that won't even do that for their own people in their own country? So, I mean, it's a long-winded argument, but what I'm saying is that in order for us to get real. Now, I want to say that if this sounds dreary, I'm very, very optimistic about all of this. Things are going to happen just like this so rapidly. Um, you know, we had the Jupiter Saturn um, conjunction, which starts this 20-year cycle um, of opening up and coming back. It's a cycle of culture. This cycle has been followed for as long as there's been astrologers on the planet, for as long as there's been people looking up at the sky. The 20-year rhythm between Jupiter and Saturn has been studied by every culture um, that studied the sky at all, and it goes back almost as far as people studying daylight and darkness. You know, the cycle of the the annual rotation of the Earth around the sun, or the Earth's rotating on its own axis, giving us the year and then the day. So this is big, and it's been well researched, and it's something that any astrologer that studies cycles at all always, I've never met an astrologer that had any opinion on culture that didn't study the Jupiter and Saturn cycle. Now I'm going to see if I can screen share with you on something here. Um, you see, this is, uh, oh, this is the cycle for today. My bad. Okay, I got to stop the screen share. I've got to go. I was going to show you the chart for the Jupiter and Saturn um, conjunction, which happened on the 21st of December in 2020. But without the chart, just let me explain what makes this important is that chart for the exact moment of the conjunction describes what this whole cycle will be about. Now, every time Saturn, the Lord of Karma, goes into the sign Aquarius, the sign of freedom, the sign of democracy, um, uh, new ideas, reform. Every time since the beginning of the first colonies on the Americas at Jamestown in 1607, every time that Saturn goes into Aquarius, we have a time of reform. And one of these periods, and period between 1901 and 1903, actually the word progressive was first coined in the American political dialogue. And so we've had this, this every 30 years, Saturn, approximately 29.8 years, Saturn goes into Aquarius. When that happens, we have a reform movement. Now, every 60 years, one of those 30 years is minor, then another minor, but then a major one. When Jupiter and Saturn conjunct each other, and then immediately Saturn goes into Aquarius. Up until now, it's always happened, the conjunctions always happened in Capricorn. But this conjunction happened in Aquarius. Why is that important? Because it gives extra oomph to that forward spirit of, uh, of reformation. So going back, long time back, in 2019, 2018, when I said Donald Trump would not win re-election, is because the man's, he's mentally ill. He wasn't capable of seeing beyond his own self to do something that would be genuinely in everybody else's best interest. It's not in his mental chemistry. So whoever was going to run against him, Donald Duck could have been running against him and would have won, because clearly the sign of the time was we're going into this major overhaul. Now, people get anxious, they get upset, antsy about, this period that we're in right now, where everything looks like a cliffhanger. The Democrats hold on to the Senate by the grace of God, and very narrow margin in the House. But this is important because it is allowing us to see what works and what doesn't work. All these things take time. Saturn is the Lord of time and will work out. By the way, 2 years from now, when Saturn goes into Pisces, that will continue with this revelation, continue with working things out. So this period that we're looking at is very optimistic, and because of that, we'll see changes on the planet coming about very, very rapidly. Now, just as a footnote on this, I read an article recently. Scientists have been studying the climate and have said, that there's a cycle, an eclipse cycle that's a little bit more than 18 years. Well, we're halfway through this eclipse cycle, and we're going into another one where the Earth's wobble will make it such that high tides will be higher than they are normally, and low tides will be lower than they are normally. And they're predicting that in like Clearwater and Tampa, where they have in tidal flooding about 7 times a year, it'll be at least 70 times a year. And quite possibly in many parts of the world, we'll see flooding at the time of high tide, at least 20 days of the month. So obviously we're going to have to do, just remedial measures are going to have to be taken here in the United States. And of course, it's a disaster for people that live in the, Mariel Islands or down on the equator in the South Pacific, where, their islands are going to be completely submerged. I was talking to an astrologer from Mauritius a year and a half ago, and he was telling me about how severe it had already become there. So yeah, we're in for a wild sled ride, and there'll be, many things that will happen. But, the Paris Climate Accords should have been signed into law 50 years ago. I mean, what were we thinking? I don't mean we, I mean, most of you people here knew um, from, at least as far back as April 22nd, 1970, which was the first Earth Day, which, by the way, was the largest gathering globally up to that point that had ever happened. And so um, it isn't that we weren't savvy, that something was up and that we needed to take care of it. It's just uh, the steps we've taken are minuscule compared to what needs to happen. I get upset, but I gotta say, when Sally asked this question, when Pluto goes into Aquarius in 2023, we'll see the countries and cultures of the world connecting with each other, having some teeth, being able to really, dive in and work out something that will be good for everybody. Now, the other question that Sally asked was, when will free energy machines no longer be repressed? I read that, and the first thing that entered my mind was, I don't know what free energy machines are, and maybe I don't know about them because they're repressed. Um, but it had the sound to me of like asking the question, "Have you stopped beating your wife?" It's like, I'm not so certain that anything is being uh, repressed. It's very, very easy to fall into a conspiratorial pattern of thinking that something's being held back. Do you know when the when New York City decided to put in electric lighting? Thomas Edison had fought to get this done. The gas company had gas lighting in there. They fought tooth and nail, did everything to sabotage it so that it couldn't happen. But the weight of history was on the side of it will happen. I had a friend back in the 60s that had a Maverick, a car. I think Ford made him or somebody, but he was getting over, we marveled because he got over 200 miles to the gallon in his car. And, when he told the, Ford company about it, they says, "Oh, you got an experimental car." And they gave him a new car and they got regular mile and took that one. So and during the Second World War, they asked battery companies if they could make batteries that lasted longer because they, for the military, that was essential. And they said, yes, we can, but don't let anybody know. We'll make them for the Army, but that's it. And so I'm completely aware that for greed, a small interest group can suppress a technology or hold something back. But the big burst of energy is such that all kinds of stuff is going to happen. And I predict by 2023, later that year, we will have, not just in the United States, but in many places around the world, a decentralized power grid, meaning that there'll be solar panels on people's houses. Then people like farmers in the 1800s will have a windmill on their property. It and it won't be just one gigantic wind farm. It won't be just one gigantic, you know, uh, 40 acres of land with solar panels on it. The reason is very simple. If everybody has their own power supply. It can't be sabotaged. You know, if your power goes down, you can borrow some from your neighbor. You know, like, can I borrow a cup of sugar? It's like, it makes perfect sense that this is what's going to be happening during the next 3 years. Um, you know, we will, as I say, between 2021 and 2023, lots of things are going to happen. One of the big things here is that uh, people get a pent up frustration with how long things take to get done through what would you say, ordinary bureaucratic processes. And so there'll be workarounds, long, Hail Mary passes that move the ball way down the court, starting in about 2 years. Anyway, um, it's quite interesting. By 2026, when Uranus uh, enters Gemini, we'll be getting ready for the United States of America to be going through their Uranus return, which happens every 84 years. Uh, it's it's a time where we could be, like in some kind of fighting, like we have every time Uranus has been in Gemini, the United States, personally, you know, or we can have finally made our peace with ourselves, with each other. And this will be a time that is skyrocketing the acceptance of alternative energy sources. Uh, if you go to Iceland or in places in Greenland and such, where they have ther- um, in thermal energy that comes from the earth that they use for a source of power, heat, all kinds of stuff. It's uh, there'll be local spins on this all around the world. Now the question from Mary Weiss is, Jupiter is retrograde, and about Jupiter being retrograde, and what can we say about Jupiter retrograde? I'm really glad you asked this question. Everybody, even people who aren't too interested in astrology, know about Mercury retrograde. And every planet can be retrograde. The sun and the moon can't be, but Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto all have periods of retrograde activity. And from Mars on out, they're all retrograde for a certain period of time every year. Now, when Jupiter turns retrograde, it is always trine the sun. Trine is 120 degrees. It's a building happy time. And the retrograde period means moving against the grain of the sun. Well, what does that mean in real terms? It's a time of digesting and digressing, going back over something that you've already done, looking at it. You can think of it as like a cow chewing its cud. But Jupiter is a mental planet. It's the other end. We have Mercury, which has 3 retrograde periods a year. Mercury is our sense perception. It is our reasoning, our logic. It is the finite mind. So when Mercury is retrograde, our sense perception can not function the way that we think it should. Our senses and our mental capacity can get jumbled. That's why when somebody says, I'll meet you at 2 o'clock, and they're calling you up at 2 o'clock, and you said, I could swear you said 3 o'clock. It, in other words, this kind of confusion, everybody knows informational confusion happens under Mercury retrograde, and so on. Many things have to be redone. It's not terrible. It is a good reality check. But Jupiter retrograde is even more important than Mercury retrograde. And why is that? Because Jupiter is our higher mind. Jupiter is the, the value system that we have. And, most of us, most of the time, myself included for sure, we end up with massive unconscious prejudices. We go out and gather information based on what we expect to see. You listen to a talk show host that happens to be on the other side of the political aisle from you, and you're hearing them and you're thinking, why would anybody think that way? Well, they gathered facts that supported the hypothesis that they already had. We all do that. It only comes to our attention when we hear it from somebody who thinks vastly differently than we do. So, what's important for us about this period of Jupiter retrograde? Jupiter turned retrograde on the 20th of June at 2 degrees of Pisces, and will turn direct on October 18th at 22 degrees of Aquarius. So when it trined the sun, the sun was at 28 Gemini, hadn't yet crossed into Cancer. And this was starting that opportunity to take apart all of the things that are in us that are prejudicial. And it will go on until October, when it's on the 22nd degree of Aquarius, and will be trine again to the sun, which at the time will be at 4 degrees of Libra. Why is this important? Well, if you go back, Jupiter turned retrograde last year, 2020, in Capricorn, 27 Capricorn. And, it turned direct at 17 degrees of Capricorn. And of course, it was trine the sun in Taurus first when it turned retrograde, and then it was trine Virgo when it turned direct. Why is this astrology signs important? Because now, with Jupiter in Pisces and Aquarius, we're talking about big ideas. Jupiter in Capricorn was about what's in it for me, what's practical, what works, what can I acquire out of it. It's hierarchical and selfish. At best, it's dutiful and results oriented. But the positive side of Jupiter in Pisces and in Aquarius is that it pulls us toward that positive side, that loving side of our nature, but also the side of everybody's pretty good. We all have different points of view, and that's fine. That is the backbone of a democracy, the plurality. That's why that as an old Hindu, it hurts me so much to see what's happened in India as this PJ party of Hindu fundamentalists uh, monocropping the country and making it, like conform to this religious dictatorialism in the name of culture, which is silly. Um, you see the same in a different vein in Iran, where you want to have everybody has got to be a Muslim, and the laws are going to be uh, uh, Muslim laws. The only way to have a functioning democracy is if it's secular, if it allows for the free practice of all religions. And that is its strength, and that is America's strength. Um, America's strength is in its plurality. And we are coming to our own during this time. People talk about, the home of the brave and the land of the free and all of that. Well, the people who formed the United States, the white European settlers, slaughtered the indigenous people that lived here. They didn't discover America, they came to conquer it. Um, and they built a civilization. Our forefathers built a civilization on the back of enslaved people. Oh, but we had good principles. That is Jupiter. Jupiter is the higher mind, the positive principles. But where the rubber meets the road is, do our principles, our higher ideals, come uh, to earth and touch us in our daily lives? Do they inform uh, the way that we live our lives? When I was putting together uh, some thoughts for discussion today, uh, I was um, taken by a couple of quotes from my spiritual master, Meher Baba, the truths of it just ring so loud. Spiritual freedom has to be won by oneself, for oneself, through watchful and unfailing war against the lower self and lower desires. Think of it. It's a come as you are war. You are your own worst enemy. I am my worst enemy. Each of us is. And when we try to come together as a country, as a group, and work out something that we can all agree to, have certain rules that uh, function in a way that allows us to have a civilization. Uh, it's a very big deal, and it can only happen uh, in the world that everybody here would want to envision if we're all taking responsibility for winning our own freedom. And spiritual freedom is the backbone of all the other freedoms. Other than that, we just have freedom of desire. And, that just leads us to uh, endless controversy, war with each other. The other quote that I had from Meher Baba that stuck in my mind is, desires, however, cannot be effectively overcome through mechanical repression. They can be annihilated only through knowledge. And that's where astrology comes in and can be of help. If we, at least at the theoretical level, come to understand what the operating principles are. We at least know where to aim our guns. We at least know where to put our effort. Uh, this is all about changing our mind. As I said in my first chapter of my book and in many lectures and articles, the 5 gifts of astrology, talk about the 5 mental transformations that happen in the study of astrology. The first one is tolerance. Well, guess what? I've worked on being more tolerant my whole life, even before um, coming to astrology. But astrology has helped. It has eliminated so much of the difficulties with that, and we could go on. But my point is, this period of Jupiter being retrograde that we are in now is very significant. I'm going to show you something, if I can get the screen save up here. Um, yeah, there we go. Now, uh, you, you know, we have the north node of the moon right now is in Gemini. The south node is in Sagittarius. Mercury rules Gemini, Jupiter rules Sagittarius. So the problem with Sagittarius is that it can be all preaching and no doing. We get the idea, but it doesn't get translated into something. The Dharma for this time period is the North Node in Gemini means that we have to, in my interpretation of this, is we have to be open to new ideas, to opening our thought process to what could possibly, what could we be overlooking? Now, I'm sure that all of you here are more tolerant than I am, but I find these emotions come up inside of me when I hear somebody on the news saying something that, in my way of thinking, they know that they're telling a lie. Why are they doing that? But the key is to be able to listen and to be able to extract from that information that we didn't have. If you already think, oh, I know all of that stuff, well, you don't learn anything. Your mind is closed. Uh, and as I say, Jupiter is the basket that all this information gets collected in. And so what happens is that we fall back into this Jupiter on the south node here. Sagittarian south node of being very set in our ways. And the difficulty with that for all of us is that we seldom find it easy to give other people or other thoughts the benefit of the doubt. Now, Mercury rules Virgo and it rules Gemini. Jupiter rules Pisces and Sagittarius. So Mercury and Jupiter are like opposite each other, and yet they have to work together. You have to be able to gather information. You have to have sense perception, reason, logic, all of that. And you have to have a thinking process in order to gather the wisdom that you need to go through life. But the difficulty is that we end up getting in our own way. Now, to Mary's question, this period of Jupiter being retrograde is a time for us to delineate what it is that we actually believe and to take note of what emotions come up inside of us over the various things that we espouse or that we believe are true. And if we take it to heart, any Jupiter retrograde period can be wonderful for taking our ideals and ideas apart and coming to some new conclusions. What makes this so important this year and this cycle is, yes, Jupiter was retrograde last year. It'll be retrograde next year, but it's only this year that Jupiter will be retrograde in Aquarius. And Aquarius, again, is a sign of democracy, the sign of you have an idea that's different than mine. Um, you know, you're, Episcopalian, I'm Catholic, I'm black, you're white. It's like I come from India, you come from Nova Scotia. It doesn't, again, to be able to celebrate our differences allows us to build something big and unique and different than we would ever come to on our own. That's why I'm saying it is very important during this time that we overcome our initial impulse to be angry with people who disagree with us. Jupiter and Mars have a funny relationship with each other. You'll notice when you are with somebody who has Mars Jupiter conjunct or in trine, that they're extremely competitive, that they are very forceful, and that energy can be for good or ill. But the point is, Mars is desire, and desire needs direction. Jupiter is values, and values can supply direction. Now, I'm digressing on this because when Jupiter and Saturn conjuncted each other, let me see if I can, by some miracle, get this up here. Hold on just a second. I guess not. I can't. Yes, I got it. Okay. Here's the Jupiter Saturn conjunction. You see, this was December 20. Can you see this? You can't see it? I have screen sharing on front of me here. It says, but you can't see it? Okay. Let me see. Okay, let me try it again. Now can you see it? Okay. See, here's Jupiter and Saturn conjunct. That was December 21st. This is sort of a template for the next 20 years of human history. So what do we have? I mean, I had it set up for Washington, D.C. It just shows how it works out in this country, but this would be for everywhere. And, the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction happened at the same moment everywhere on the planet. Pluto is squaring Mars. Well, what does that mean? Mars in Aries is, impulsive. It is, it's the third chakra. It's our sense of identity. It's the acting out. Pluto is squaring it. So there is tremendous force here. Now, I'm going to give you the answers at the back of the book, even though there's, tremendous war between these two. And, Pluto's the lord of the underworld, Mars is the god of war. We have in this chart, Neptune is squaring the nodal axis, which is this thing that, I was talking about last year about the foundation of misinformation. All of what we are dealing with, the like anti-vaxxing people on Facebook and stuff. Anyway, so I just wanted to share with you that the general thrust is positive. And yes, it's not without, some things going back and forth here. There's sort of like if you're sawing a log, the saw goes back and forth, uh, and eventually the motion of going back and forth eventually cuts through the wood. And this is sort of what has to happen during this period. But I was saying that knowledge is our way out. Knowledge isn't just collecting information. Knowledge is being able to fashion it into some over large concept, and to use that larger concept to change our behavior, to change our thought process. Now, we could talk a lot more about, just so much about the retrograde Jupiter, and I hadn't spoken on it really before, so I wanted to acknowledge that I'm really glad that you brought this up. Now, Judy brought to us the question, um, what do astrological indicators suggest in regard to inflation in our country? Will it become worse or abate? Uh, the answer is yes and no, meaning I, my own study on this, I'll say there were, from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, there were 6 times since the Second World War that we had inflation that was higher than 5%. Now, the White House right now is promoting the narrative that of an inflationary period, the one that we're in now is most like the one that happened in 1946 to 48, which was created by the deficiencies and irregularities in the supply chain following the Second World War. I'll just mention there was also in 1950 to 51, there was, the whole year 1951 was the beginning of the Korean War, and there was panic, stockpiling of consumer goods that created the inflation. And then from March of 1969 to January of 1971, we had a booming economy, and that powered the huge price increase. We see that going on here and now, and I'll talk about that again in a minute. And then from 1973 to 1982, we had these huge spikes in oil prices that created a ripple effect through the economy, and we had this high in inflationary cycle. Then from 1989 to 91, the first Persian Gulf, we had the increase in oil prices again. And then in 2008, the gas prices skyrocketed. See, there's a pattern here. We had inflation a lot of the time uh, directed by increase in gas prices. Now, interestingly, what rules gas? Neptune. What rules inflation? Neptune. So Neptune is in its own rulership now. Now, it doesn't have to mean inflation. Neptune being in Pisces happens every 165 years. Doesn't have to be an inflationary cycle, but Jupiter, the planet of abundance, is going to conjunct Neptune at 23 degrees of Pisces next April. Now, I would like to believe that inflation will go down sometime soon. But as an astrologer, I don't really think it's going to happen. I think we're going to see inflation going strong until that Jupiter-Neptune conjunction. Now, I don't think it's a straight climb up the mountain here. I think there'll be, an up and down effect, but I don't think that we're going to see inflation back at 2%, where the Fed would like it to be until sometime at least next summer. But we will see a precipitous dive in the housing market next summer, somewhere between the end of April and the beginning of August. And when that happens, that will have a dampening effect. Now, it can be that the economy will bifurcate, that there'll be some things that are going to go up, continue to go up at that time, and some things are going to, like languish. But this will all tend to come together in the fall of 2022, when Saturn and Uranus close back into, they don't actually become exact, but they come to to within a degree of exactly square each other next fall. And when that happens, even though it'll be irritating, the markets globally will straighten out, and we will have a straight climb up the mountain. Now, one final thing on inflation. The inflationary cycle has been the biggest driver in the inflationary cycle, and I can make a case for it, all of them, is connected to fossil fuel. And I think that in the next 2 to 3 years, that's going to be so much less a factor for two reasons. One is that we're going to have other fuels taking over from the fossil fuel industry, period. But also countries like Iraq, Iran, Indonesia, Venezuela, countries, Mexico, that are heavily reliant on gasoline, are going to see the handwriting on the wall. And they're going to be interested in selling as much of it as they can before it goes completely out of style. So I think that we will see, Judy, if I hope I'm answering your question, we will see this spike that we're in now will continue unabated for a while. it isn't just a supply chain problem, but it is primarily that. And as the supply chain flattens out, uh, it will be less of an ingredient. I would, if I had to guess on the numbers, I would say we'll see inflation staying around 3% for in the next 4 or 5 months. Anyway, it will eventually go very close to zero by the end of 2022, which will be uncomfortable for some economists, and then we'll go back up to a normal range. Anyway, I appreciate all of you being willing to spend a little time with me and putting up with the fact that I'm, you know, really in the doghouse over this how to use Zoom effectively yet. But I'm getting there. I get a little bit better every month. And by next month, hopefully, we'll be, cooking, with this in a better way.
Hey,
So,
Bob,
yeah,
you have a couple questions in chat. Do you want to take them up or do you want to table them till next time?
I don't see them.
When will voting rights be restored? When will Trump and enablers be out of the news and out of the picture? And when will COVID be under control?
Let me go first. COVID will be under control by 2023, about halfway through 2023. Trump and his enablers represent the crest of lunacy. He's, I don't think anybody in their right mind would actually like this guy. It's like you could imagine him going on America, You Got Talent, and singing and doing a better job than he did as president. So it doesn't make sense, but as long as we have the disinformation and all of the things that go along with it, I believe that by 2024, he'll be a relic. And the voting rights thing is most important because it is America coming to terms with whether we're going to be a democracy or not. It is a sad thing, and that we're being put to the test, but we'll see. America's gotten through rough times before, and we're doing better, facing our own, misogyny, racism, all of the ills that have haunted us. If you have a friend that's a raging alcoholic, they're not going to get better until they face that they're an alcoholic. I would assume. I could be wrong, but that's my thought on it. And it's the same with nations. America's a wonderful place. It's a great country. It's the best. But there is certain things that are the dark side, and that we have to face it and face, yes, America actually did these things. If we pretend that we didn't, we can't heal. It's the same thing as like after the Second World War, Germany faced the fact that Nazism, that Hitler was a mistake. I mean, it had to, it had to be glaring and in its face, but as a nation, it healed. And that's how it, actually became the powerhouse of Europe. And anyway, on and on. But the point is that I have great hope that by 2026, all of this will be history. you know, the cliffhangers that we're having to go through over the next few years. It's not a Democrat versus Republican issue. It's whether we can look beyond our own self-interest and really be, all of us, be of service to each other. If we can't do that, we're wasting our time. It's only if we are able to cross over that bridge and be of some larger sentiment to do what's right for the collective, rather than saying, I know what's right for the collective, I'm going to do what I want to do and say that's in everybody's best interest, which is where a lot of political leaders have gone. But, you know, there's bright spots on the horizon, and we will get there. I am a thorough believer of this. As I say, I'm very optimistic. Do we get all the questions? Okie dokie. See you next time. All of you have a great month. And if you have questions or thoughts for the newsletter or anything, send them to me and we'll deal with it. Have a great rest of the day.